I am also making available my little booklet on a biblical view on climate change. So we'll get into that issue and give you a chance to really interact on that topic with a person that has published a lot of academic studies over the years. But let's first of all go to our friend Jonathan Saenz, president of Texas Values. You might remember him, of course, having served in the past with Liberty Institute, a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin with a law degree from the University of Houston, and joins us now by phone. Jonathan, always great to have you on the program.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Kerby.
Let's, if we can, right off the bat, encourage people to mark their calendar, if they haven't already, September 6th and 7th, the Texas Faith, Family, and Freedom Forum. You have got a star-studded cast of speakers there, and so it is the place to be on September 6th and 7th there in Austin. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, we're excited about this. This is an annual event that Texas Values is hosting and putting on, and we think it's going to be one of the most exciting events of the year, particularly when you look at the issues of faith, family, and freedom. And so we intend to do this every year. Last year was the first year. We sold out the event last year. We found a bigger space this year to accommodate demand, and we're going to need it. We've got U.S. Senator Ted Cruz is going to be one of our confirmed speakers, Congressman Chip Roy, Senator Lois Kolkhorst, State Representative Candy Noble. We've got someone from the Trump administration coming, Attorney Eric Treen. We've also got our good buddy Jeff Mateer from the Attorney General's office, Human Coalition Representative Chelsea Human, our good friend from Sidewalk Advocates for Life, Laura Musica. Look, I'm going to run out of time if I tell you all the names, Kerby. So go to txvalues.org and find out information. It's a 2-day event. You don't have to come both days, but there's enough to see in a day and a half, and it's very reasonable. It's $30. It includes Chick-fil-A lunch, of course, and you can hardly get Chick-fil-A for $10 as it is, but we still have tickets, but this event will sell out. But go to txvalues.org. It's on September 6th and 7th at Great Hills Baptist Church in Austin, and you're going to hear from experts from the national, state, and local level on what's happening on the issues of faith, family, and freedom in the courts, the legislature, and the media, and we are certainly going to be talking about what happened during the state legislative session earlier this year.
Let me just mention, too, of course, you mentioned $35, but then there's a student level. There's a dinner that night on Friday night, which you may want to attend. There's also what's called the Lone Star Package, where you can hear Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin's been on the program with us before. So there's a number of different levels that you can participate in. And even if you can't go, let me encourage you maybe to make a donation, and maybe later they'll send you some of the information from there as well, because this is just a real important time to educate listeners. And, of course, just the other day, I was at an event that was a Republican-sponsored event where we had a number of state senators and state representatives talking about what happened in the last legislature. And just for a moment, for somebody that maybe has not heard you and me talk about this before, there were some very significant attaboys that came out of this legislative session. And sometimes when you hear people complain about what didn't happen, and there were some things that certainly need to happen in the future, there were a number of successes. What were some of those?
Yeah, no, look, we're excited about that, and that's what this event is about. Go to txvalues.org if you want to get your tickets now for September 6th and 7th. It's about educating people. You know, it's about making sure that they know what the law is, what the current policy issues are, what your rights are, and what passed during the legislative session. You know, a big thing that passed was the Save Chick-fil-A Religious Freedom Bill. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. Congressman Chip Roy and Ted Cruz, they had a role to play even though they work at the federal level. But the authors of that bill, State Representative Matt Krause from the Dallas-Fort Worth area and Senator Brian Hughes, they're both going to be there and talk about this issue.
Yes.
We just got confirmation that former council member from San Antonio, Greg Brockhouse, who pushed back against what other council members did on this issue, he's going to be one of our speakers. But then he also had great legislation, that one that was supported and sponsored and carried by Candy Noble, state representative, which is a bill that makes it illegal for government to enter into contracts with abortion providers. We see that in the abortion realm. We see that with Planned Parenthood, sex education stuff. Those bills go into effect September 1st. In addition to that, the Born Alive Infant Protection Act now is law. So if a baby is born alive as a result of a failed abortion, they have full protection under the law. That bill was carried by State Representative Jeff Leach and also Senator Kolkhorst. By the way, they're both going to be speakers at this event.
Right.
So, and I want to mention, too, you mentioned there's a private dinner, on Friday night. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin is a 3-star general.
Yes.
He was one of the first members and the founding members of the Delta Force. He now uses that same personality to fight for religious liberty for Family Research Council. He's seen it all, just about. And he is an incredible speaker, and he's going to be giving the keynote address at our dinner on Friday night.
Yes, much as mentioned, we'll have in just a few minutes Floyd McLendon in here. And, of course, he was a Navy SEAL, so we'll talk about that. And, of course, his congressional race in the future. And I think it's a good point that you were making here, that we need to know our rights. And we have on our website, pointofview.net, a link to txvalues.org. And as people go there, either through our website or directly to yours, the first article is Back to School Buzz, Know Your Parental Privacy and Religious Liberty Rights. And a lot of people think, well, okay, Jonathan, now the legislature's out of session. There's nothing more for you to do. Oh, yes, there is. As a matter of fact, sometimes these battles over religious liberty keep you very, very busy, don't they?
Absolutely. And we get calls every year when school starts, people trying to figure out what they're okay to do. Because a lot of times you go back to school and the question is, well, what'd you do over the summer? A lot of times students are asked to write articles, or they're asked to do projects, or they're asked to present in some way something related to whatever they did over the summer. And a lot of students in Texas, even though they go to public school, they may have gone to a church camp during the summer. They may have gone on a mission trip. They just want to talk freely about what they did during their summer, and they want to talk about it from a biblical perspective. And so you have the right to do that. And I was actually a part of a law that was written in 2007, which put into state law Supreme Court decisions on a lot of these issues. So if you want to have a Bible club at school, or you want to talk about things from a religious perspective when you're given freedom to write about your experiences from the summer or something related to a school project, you want to engage in prayer during lunch, you want to acknowledge different Christian holidays. There's a whole host of things that are written into state law. If you want to not go to school one day because of a religious observation that you have as a Christian, not to mention reminding people that the Trump administration reversed what Obama did, and schools are not required to allow boys into girls' bathrooms. We don't talk about that issue as much as we did a year or so ago, but it's still out there. And all that is covered on our blog piece on Back to School Buzz on txvalues.org.
We're going to take a break, but let me just mention there's a violation hotline there, 512-478-2220, or info@txvalues.org. We have, for example, See You at the Poll coming up soon. We oftentimes talk about that, and if you have any students that, quote, get in trouble for that, or maybe they're involved in a good news club or something else, and you are saying, I'm not sure what the administration is telling my kids here is right, you can get to our good friends at txvalues.org or simply go to their website. We'll take a break and talk more about some of these important issues right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, in the midst of all the criticism of this country and its citizens, I try to provide some positive material. In that vein, I posted an article co-authored by Tucker Carlson that had the hopeful title, Take a Breath, America's Still a Decent Country Filled with Decent People. But when it came time to discuss the article, my roundtable guests focused on the stories the two authors gave of what could be called crazy commentary. If you want an example of how some in the media have become unhinged, pay attention. One of the guests on MSNBC accused President Trump of giving subliminal orders to disenfranchised white people. The president may have a number of faults, but being subliminal isn't one of them. If he's thinking it, he says it. Another guest made a big deal about the fact that the flags would fly half-mast until August 8th. He pointed out that that is 8-8. So what? He reminds us that the number is significant in the neo-Nazi and white supremacy movement because the letter H is the eighth letter of the alphabet. So apparently 8-8 is HH, which stands for Heil Hitler. Does that mean we can no longer use the number 8 since it's a racist number? Another guest tried to argue that the President of the United States has been talking about exterminating Latinos. Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote than Mitt Romney. But don't let that get in the way of the over-the-top rhetoric being spoken by commentators who obviously hate the president. Mind you, these are just a few of the examples that appear in this article. You can find many more. And it's a long way to the November 2020 elections. Most of us are already worn out by such crazy commentary, but we still have 15 months left to go. I don't blame you for wanting to turn off your television and canceling your newspaper subscription. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz with us for a few more minutes. Again, president of Texas Values. In just a few minutes, we'll have in studio with us Floyd McLendon. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with him as he is going to be running for the Congressional District 32 seat, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But, Jonathan, we may have cut you off real quickly because when we talk about this whole idea, there's the Texas School Children's Religious Liberty Act. There's the so-called Merry Christmas law and others. And those, first of all, high accolades to you at Texas Values for getting some of those laws passed. But I suspect that many parents, when they hear their children are told that they can't say Merry Christmas, they can't talk about their Christian faith, when they can't have a good news club, they can't have a Bible club after hours, they say, oh, well, that's just too bad. Instead of saying, wait a minute, if we continue to allow the secular world to stamp on our values, we're going to lose more and more of those. So that's why you really encourage people to call your violation line, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's how a lot of times we get things done. I mean, that's where things like the Merry Christmas law and school children's religious liberty, all those things came from people contacting us saying, hey, there's a problem happening in my public school. But one of the things that we want to make sure that people know is that these laws now exist, so we don't have to, relitigate these things or do them over again or fight the same battle. They've already been fought and won. All you need is something from us in a reference to our state law so people at public schools know, oh, I'm okay, I'm not violating the law, this is what the state law says, this is what I have to follow, and then they can go about doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is focusing on teaching kids and not getting themselves entangled into litigation or disputes that really are violation of people's constitutional rights. And so, and that's a big thing for us. It's not just about passing laws and winning court cases. We then want people to use that so they can go out there and get the benefit of those freedoms. We'll be talking a lot about that, too, at our Faith, Family, and Freedom Forum on September 6th and 7th. Still tickets available for that. Senator Ted Cruz, state legislators, local leaders, a whole host of people are going to be there and talk about what your rights are, what you can do about it, and how you can really be encouraged and excited about being active as a Christian.
And again, I might just mention that we have information about that on our website, or you can just simply go to txvalues.org either way and find out about the forum on the 6th and the 7th. And some of the other articles you have there, I think, illustrate a point. Okay, the Save Chick-fil-A bill is law. So that settles it. No, not really, because the article you have in front of there talks about the cake baker Jack Phillips. Now, he won the case at the Supreme Court. You would think that would be the end of it, and you would be very wrong. Or you can see Barronelle Stutzman, who is in the state of Washington, who actually, they sent the case back to the Washington State Supreme Court, saying, in light of this, we want you to relitigate this, to reevaluate this, and they simply didn't do what they were asked to do. So just because a law is on the books, just because a Supreme Court precedent comes down, we still, as citizens, need to be vigilant about some of these issues. And that's another reason why you're really encouraging people to go to the Faith, Family, and Freedom Forum, because just because there's a law on the books doesn't mean people are obeying it, right?
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, that can be one thing that's frustrating a lot of times, where you'll continue to see violations of a law that's already into effect and went through a lot of hard work for it to get to that point. And sometimes people thrive off that. I mean, they're hoping for that, or they're hoping to cast some doubt on some of these things. It's going to be real interesting to see what the city of San Antonio does when this law takes effect on September 1st.
Oh, yes.
Because so far, their rhetoric has been that they're not going to follow it, or that they don't have to, acknowledge it, and they'd be wrong. But so we'll see how that goes. But it's not just about Chick-fil-A issue either. It's about religious freedom,
right,
because that law was passed because the government tried to punish people for donations they gave to nonprofit entities. Guess what other entities are nonprofit that are Christian? Churches. And that came up in discussion in the debate on this bill, some people suggesting that the government should punish or restrict donations to churches, if they have certain views that follow the Bible on marriage and sexuality, that somehow the government should be punishing people and not allowing to make those donations. And so a lot for people to learn. We'll be talking about that at the Policy Forum, but certainly on September 6th and 7th, where you can still get tickets, or you can find out this information on the website. But, look, and some of these things continue to be litigated with Jack Phillips and others. And a lot of that is, finding out what your state legislator is doing. And that's one of the last things I want to mention to you, Kirby.
Sure.
Our Faith and Family Scorecard is coming out very soon. A lot of people want to know, how did my legislator vote on some of these issues? And it's not just about a handful of bills that we talk about. There are a number of bills that maybe didn't make it, but there were votes at some point in committee. There were bills that should have been supported and signed on to. We're going to get into a whole lot of details at a much more robust level than we ever had. That's the Faith and Family Scorecard. It's the only scorecard of its kind in the state of Texas, and it's coming out very soon, so people are going to want to watch for that too.
As soon as it comes out, let's make sure we get you back on here to promote it. We'll also, of course, have a link there as well. And just before we go, I know you'll be spending some time looking backwards and looking in the rearview mirror, but as you look forward, you've got some of these state representatives that have some pretty tough races in the future. You have a Speaker of the House right now, and I'm not sure he's going to stay, so we'll figure out what that's going to be. So you're going to be also kind of casting the vision for what it looks like in 2020. Now, some of your state senators won't have to run for re-election, like, of course, just the other day we had Senator Paxton in here, and she doesn't have to run this time because she's got a 4-year term, but most of them do have to run. And so even though we aren't necessarily thinking about elections, most of them are, and that's another aspect of what you have done at Texas Values through your various PACs and other organizations as well, haven't you?
Yeah, look, it's always important to be thinking about how these issues are impacted at the ballot box. And it's very clear that, who you elect to go into office has a direct impact on whether or not your rights are going to continue to be protected or if they're going to be attacked and violated. And so that's why one of the reasons why we're having this policy forum, to educate people on what the issues are and to help them make the connections of what the policies are and what some legislators, what they're supporting, so they can understand the value of the ballot box and for them to be more informed of who they're electing and the role that people play when it comes to elections. And so we get some very important elections coming up. There's a presidential election coming up. And so a lot of times people don't understand what the differences are when it comes to political parties. They don't understand some of the differences between local and state and federal government. And so we're going to cover all of those topics at our policy forum on September 6th and 7th, because we want people to be educated when they go to the ballot box. We want them to be asking candidates, where do you stand on this issue? And here's what you need to be doing in order to earn my vote. And so that's all going to be on the table, but it's incredibly relevant. And, this is just a basic part of being a Texan and being an American citizen. And so I think a lot of times people, they've been a little overwhelmed maybe sometimes with a lot of information at the national level, and they don't hear as much at the state level. We're going to cover all that ground, but a big focus is going to be what's happening around the state of Texas. I got to tell you, Kirby, before I forget, I flew back in town last night from El Paso. We know what happened a couple of weeks there was, just devastating. And my hotel was probably about less than a mile from the Walmart where the shooting was. It's been closed down. And, I couldn't help but reflect on just all the signs that I saw around there. El Paso strong, pray for El Paso, a tremendous opportunity for people to come together, to pray together, to think about what's important, and to really just connect at a community level. And so, you think about a lot of things that have happened in the El Paso area. That community is getting a lot more attention than it's gotten in the past maybe 5 or 6 years. And I just see it there and other places where people of faith are getting really excited and encouraging, and they're understanding more the value that they have in our society. And I think that's something that people can be encouraged by, and we'll be talking about at our Faith, Family, and Freedom Forum on September 6th and 7th.
And again, all of that at txvalues.org. Also, go to the right-hand column there. You'll see that there's, of course, a voter's guide that'll be important to you later when we get into the primaries and general election. Of course, we'll talk about the scorecard. There's the Texas Legislative Guide and all sorts of other resources. But most importantly, as you go there, you're going to find out a lot more about this very significant event, and I just am really excited that you have such an incredible cast of individuals, great speakers that will be addressing those topics. And if you would like to see the list, click on that button there. It will fill your screen of all sorts of people that you'll have a chance to hear from, and that all takes place September 6th and 7th at Great Hills Baptist Church in Austin, Texas. Jonathan Saenz.
I got to tell you as a closing note, too, Kirby, not that I'm trying to make too much of it, but two of our speakers are former interns of Texas Values. We've now been around long enough that some really significant individuals that spent time with us as interns, they have advanced their careers and become leaders, and now they're one of our list of speakers at this policy forum. So we're excited about that.
I think so. You're not even that old either, so I'm the old guy around here, so I have seen some of these individuals come to fruition. So thank you so much, Jonathan Saenz. When we come back, Floyd McLendon will be in studio with us. I've been looking forward to this interview, and we'll talk with him and open up the phones if you want to ask him a question. All that coming up right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
We are privileged now to have in studio with us Floyd McLendon, and he is running for Congress in the 32nd Congressional District. In just a minute, we'll describe that district a little bit. It's a little bit gerrymandered, but I used to be in that district many years ago. Now I find myself in the 3rd Congressional District. I've known Van Taylor for decades, but nevertheless, this is a very important congressional district and an individual that brings a great deal of expertise to this particular conversation. 25 years serving in the Navy, individual that eventually became a Navy SEAL, and it's always great to have a Navy SEAL in studio with us, and we certainly do thank those of you that have served, but also has run his campaign already, and he's just getting started on things like limited government and lower taxes and protection of the unborn, Second Amendment, and those kinds of things. And I wanted to give you a chance to hear from Floyd. And if you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. Floyd, first of all, thank you for coming into the studio with us today.
Kerby, thank you and Point of View for having me. I really appreciate it. We're making history. This is my first face-to-face radio show.
And as a matter of fact, you know where the studio is, so I'm hoping we'll have you in here again.
Oh, absolutely.
I suspect there'll be many opportunities.
Absolutely.
And one of the opportunity this hour is that even though we have a national broadcast, which starts at 1 o'clock, this particular hour primarily is heard in the Texas area. Although I apologize for some of you in Minnesota and Nevada and a few places hearing this as well. You'll still need to know about this, man, because I think you'll be in Congress. And that is, let's talk about why you decided to run. Working in the Navy, we certainly have been blessed over the years by having individuals that were in the military that have served with distinction in Congress. I'm thinking of Sam Johnson, Van Taylor, who's on the program with us quite often, Dan Crenshaw just down the road here. And so in some respects, we have always been well served by those of you that have been in the military and then gone into public service in the government. And I think that's one of the reasons why you decided to run.
Absolutely. And the seed was planted by a former congressman in 2013. I'm a professional speaker, and I was speaking at an event for my career change. Mm-hmm. And he walked up to me and said, have you ever thought about running for Congress or running for office? And I laughed. Yeah. I was like, no, I don't really see that in the cards. And he seriously looked at me. He said, hey, I think it may be something for you in the future. Here's my card. Here's my team. Contact me. So at the time, I was headed over to Guam for a couple of years to work in Southeast Asia. And I marinated on it because I started to think about how could I continue to serve my country right after I retire. And it grew on me like this could be an opportunity for me to do so. So when I got back to the States, I contacted him and sat down and said, hey, I want to experiment and see, please mentor me. Let me see if this actually resonates with me. And it did. And it just kind of went from there. So 2016, I went to a career readiness transition program by the Honor Foundation. So it's a special operations, 4 months long, 2 days a night. I mean, two nights a week, 4 to 5 hours a night. It was very, very intrusive. And it was to see what your passion was, not what you did previously in your military career, but what are you truly passionate about? And we're going to help you develop yourself so you can connect with the civilian sector. And also we're going to connect you with that particular network and resources. They did not have one for politics. Yeah. And they laughed at me and said, yeah, right. Yeah. But as we did the assessment, they figured out, this is something that you are truly passionate about, continuing to serve your country. And then I went to Capitol Hill in 2017 under the Hill Vets Foundation. They put me in a house, submitted my resume to Congress. Congressman Pittenger, North Carolina 9th District, called me, his chief of staff, and said, hey, we would like for you to work for us. So I went and worked for them to learn behind the curtain on how Congress really works. Right. And my plan from that time on was, look, I want to run for Congress in 2020. We're retiring to Texas, and I want to be in a position to do that. And they said, absolutely. So they mentored me. I got done with that, and then we moved to Texas. My wife and I moved to Texas, the family, 2 months before I retired. And for the past 13 months, I've been in state politics with Office of the Attorney General. I've been his executive aide. So it's coming to fruition. Like it's a 6-year process that now I'm where I need to be. Me and my team are exactly where we need to be, and it's about bringing servant leadership to Congress because it's much needed. It's about reconnecting with the people, listening to what their issues are, and understanding that, and going to Congress and fighting for that. I think we're missing that point. It's also about a huge amount of compassion and teamwork between my future fellow members and I to work to a common goal. So these are just basic principles that we need to get back to, right? And it's about doing it respectfully, and it's about doing it with love.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's missing.
Well, and again, one of your themes is this idea of limited government. And when you said how Congress works, maybe how Congress doesn't work, if there is a theme that's run through the conversations we've had with Louis Gohmert, who sometimes sits in this chair, or even Van Taylor, who I interview on a pretty regular basis, is that Congress is almost dysfunctional right now. And we need to get some more of you people that know how to run a military, know how to get some order and discipline, and get some order and discipline in the House of Representatives, right?
Well, here's the great thing about our military veterans across the board is, and I think Chelsea alluded to it yesterday on your show when she said that people just don't know because they're in their ecosystem.
That's true.
Right? So you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So what the military does is it pulls you out of your comfortable ecosystem that you were in, and then it puts you into an environment that forces you to work with people that you normally may not work with. This is one of the great things that the military has, right? So I was one of those people. I grew up in Chicago, born and raised. And my mom, she used to tell me, you need to build relationships with people that are outside your ecosystem. And it didn't resonate with me until I got into the military. And I was like, oh, man, this is what she's talking about.
That's right.
It had nothing to do with how tall you were, right? You have hair, I don't, color your eyes or where you came from. It had everything to do with mission, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Are you and I being respectful with each other's differences and coming together to accomplish this mission? So that's what I'm bringing to the table. That's what my past military brothers and sisters have brought to the table. We need more of that. There's only 21% of military representation in Congress.
Right.
And we need an outside perspective. We need that worldly perspective to bring in to help solve problems.
And that's another part of that I just thought I'd mention in passing. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is limited government and lower taxes, protecting the unborn, Second Amendment. But Congress doesn't always have to deal with foreign policy issues. Senators more than members of Congress in the House of Representatives. But still, it's just good to have some people in the military that understand that what's happening in Syria, or just the other day, this huge explosion in Kabul, Afghanistan, that killed so many individuals. These are important because eventually you're going to be voting on some of those issues.
Yes,
you're
sir.
not going to be ratifying treaties like a senator.
Yes, sir.
But you're going to understand in ways that, frankly, some of the people that maybe even hate the military don't understand what is at stake here in the United States and around the world.
Absolutely. And that's okay that they don't understand. But as your leader, as your representative, it's my responsibility to help educate you, to bring you to a point of understanding. So that way you can make the proper decision when you vote, right? When you come in and you see Floyd, you say, oh, well, Floyd is about traditional family values. Floyd is about, he doesn't want his taxes taken, too much of his taxes taken out, or he doesn't want his money going to these programs that are not conducive the way that our republic was built and founded upon, right? So we have the same principles and values, and I have identified Floyd to be someone who I can trust in and go to Congress and fight for this. So that's what we really need to focus on. It's about you and I having the same values and beliefs.
Let me just mention that as you go to our website, pointofview.net, we have a link to his website, which you can find, McLendonforcongress.com. A lot of you say, I don't know how to spell his name. Good news, we already have the link there, so it's not that hard to spell. But just in case you don't.
One C, not
it's
two.
One C, and it's really easy. And there is an opportunity there for you to find out about where he stands on the issues and certainly to support his campaign. But we're going to come back and talk about some of these hot button issues that he is certainly passionate about. But I hope that the action item for you today as you're listening is to contact him and say, would you come speak to my group? You've come to speak to my women's group. Come speak to my church group. Come speak to me. Maybe I'll have a meeting in my neighborhood and have a chance to educate some of our people about that. And so as you hear this interview, you might say, I'd like to have him come and speak to our group. And we want you to encourage people to come out and to have a chance to hear him, because that's known as a grassroots campaign, and that's what he's all about. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have in studio with us for a few more minutes, Floyd McLendon. And Floyd McLendon is, again, running in the Congressional District 32. We talk about here on Point of View faith, family, and freedom. We've talked about family and freedom. We haven't talked about faith. And I thought for just a minute, share your faith commitment, because that is also very key to who you are, Floyd, isn't it?
Absolutely. My faith and spiritual connection has been since I believe I can walk. I grew up in the church. I grew up as a Seventh-day Adventist. And those who are familiar with it, I was a Pathfinder, right? A Pathfinder is like a Boy Scout or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, literally all weekend I was at church. Throughout the week, you had Bible study, things like that. And I didn't understand just how strong that my my connection to God was until I started to go through mid-20s. I started to go through adversity.
Of course.
And started to I started to be able to start to see, how God put his invisible hand on some of the things that I was doing, because I had no clue whether or not I was going to be successful, especially going through Navy SEAL training.
Yes.
I would show up some days and be like, I don't know if I'm going to be here at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, I was there, and I'm like, you know what? This is definitely the invisible hand of God. And it was about the people who I grew up with in the church who prayed for me and who just kept me in their thoughts.
Yes.
So that's when I really start to appreciate my upbringing in the church.
Yes. And again, I would encourage people to come and have you, especially if you're speaking in a church venue, to really share your testimony for a while and how that unfolded. But whether that is a political group, a city council meeting, or a Chamber of Commerce meeting, or Elks Club, or whatever,
right,
you're available for all that. But for people that aren't familiar, I've looked at these maps, but most people haven't. When we talk about the 32nd Congressional District, some people say, well, isn't that Highland Park? Yes. Is it in Garland? Yes. It's all over the place.
Yes.
So give us a little bit of a feel for what that district looks like.
Yes. So the way I explain it, to give you a visual, a picture of the letter L.
Yes.
And then you tip it over to the right.
Yes.
Right. So what you'll have is North Dallas. It goes up Richardson, hits South Plano, hits Garland, it hits Wiley, it hits Saatchi, hits Rowlett. So that's the general basis of the District 32. And then you have all these different type of corners, that will branch out. So it is a little bit difficult to figure out the lines.
Yes.
So,
well, and I have an oldest daughter and a son-in-law that are in your district. I'm not. But here's another point for some of our listeners right now. Just because you're not in the 32nd Congressional District doesn't mean you can't help and support your particular campaign. I'm sure Van Taylor would appreciate all the work that he might get for his reelection campaign, but the bottom line is he's probably going to be easily reelected. Some of you that are listening to some of the other candidates that are doing pretty well, but this is going to be a real challenge. You're going to face an incumbent who was elected last time, and so in some respects, you're going to need all the help you can get, right?
Absolutely. And what it really boils down to is look, Dallas Republicans, we are, we're down right now, but we're not out. Yeah. And trust me, I'm a person who's been there. And I've been successful of coming out of that, and I want to bring my leadership and experience to doing so. And the current congressman who's in the seat, he's not doing what he said he was going to do. He's not providing what he needs to provide for District 32. So with that, we need to get him out the seat and be replaced by someone who will. And I believe that's me.
And I also believe that you have to pay attention not only to the person, which is important, but the party. Because some people might say, well, maybe he's okay, but the bottom line is his party right now is different than the party that was there before. And anybody that's paid attention to what's happening in Congress right now, the Democratic leadership in the Congress is not moving through any legislation. They have not passed even a budget. I mean, it's really embarrassing on what is not happening there. Not that all the solutions are future Republican leadership in the House, but at least you get a sense that something is happening. Nothing is happening right now. So pay attention not only to the person, but the party, because if we get enough Floyd McLendons elected, then you turn the House back, and maybe we could get something that looks like a little more of a functional government, because it really is not functioning right now, is it?
It is not functioning very well. And a prime example is the topic of universal health care.
Yes.
Right? It's going to raise the taxes. It's going to limit opportunities for us, to choose. My wife and I, we see this on a day-to-day basis. She has a chronic illness, and I give you an example. She was prescribed a medication, and they said, well, here's the generic one.
Yes, there we go.
But here's the one that works better than the generic one that won't eat up your stomach, right? So the generic one was $8, and the quality one was $200.
Yes.
Right. So I am right there with you, Dallas. I'm right there with you, District 32. And I understand that what we need accessible, quality, affordable health care for everyone. That's what we need. We don't need universal health care. There's 7 states right now who has shown a template that is good to use private health services. 7 states. So we need to look into that and see how do we implement that to our country.
And again, here's a good example. You might say, well, I don't know about the person that's in office right now in the 32nd district, but his party is promoting Medicare for all, Green New Deal, all sorts of programs that are going to be very expensive. Let's see if we can actually have free college tuition, as if we could afford it and everything else, all while we have a $22 trillion debt.
It's going to destroy our economy. The Green New Deal, $93 trillion, like hundreds of thousands of jobs that is going to be lost. And what they're not telling you is that oil and gas and technology and all these companies have improved their processes to benefit toward having a better world, right? Toward preserving our earth. But you're not going to hear that in media. Yeah. You're not going to hear that.
Somebody had sitting in that chair just a few days ago had been a professor of economics at San Jose State University. She was a free market person, but she finally left California to Texas, and she's been saying in Texas, don't turn Texas into California. As a guy that was born in California and knows the state, when my father ran for the California Assembly, Ronald Reagan just became the governor. Ronald Reagan could not be the governor in California anymore. But Ronald Reagan, or somebody that has those values like yours, could become a member of Congress here in Texas, could be the governor of Texas. So let's learn some lessons here. And that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about your campaign. But let's talk real quickly about how people can connect with you. McLendonforcongress.com. There is a place for people to get involved with you. There's a place for them to join up if they want to know where you stand on the issues. I've only covered a few, but we're going to have you back again, so there's no problem there. And if they would like to maybe have you come and speak, that's the first step, because if you're going to build a grassroots movement, it's going to come from a lot of those teas, a lot of those evening brunches, morning brunches and evening desserts and things like that, where you'll just have a chance to talk with the people. And so if people would like to have you come and speak, you're available, aren't you?
Yes, I am available. Absolutely. And what I encourage is 2 things for us to do together. One is prayer.
Yes.
Like pray, and then, pray to come from a place of love, to have God and His Holy Spirit resonate within you throughout the day, your thoughts, what you say, your actions. And the next is we have to get involved. We have to, you and I and our fellow men and women, we have to come out and we have to express our conservative life, and we have to come out and vote. We have to come out and extend ourselves to raising our children how they need to be raised. And we have to financially provide when we have the opportunity.
Well, again, I'm a precinct chairman, not in your district, but I want to encourage precinct chairman in your district to go out there and start walking precincts and help you out.
Thank you.
Floyd,
Kerby. I really
it's been
appreciate
great to have
that.
you in studio. I know we'll do it again.
Thank you.
We need to take a break. We got a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. They're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. We've got a lot to cover over the next couple of hours. First of all, we're going to maybe focus a little bit on my commentary today called Crazy Commentary, because it leads us right into a whole discussion of the roots of America and whether or not America has racist roots. You could say yes if you say certainly slavery was part of America, but if you are saying that the whole foundation of America rests on racism, well, then I think you've got a different set of questions involved with that, and that brings us to something the New York Times is doing in terms of the 1619 Project, so we'll get into that. Also, some comments that I've posted by Rich Lowry about some of the comments made by a couple of presidential candidates, Beto O'Rourke as well as Bernie Sanders. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. And then that will lead a little bit later not only to issues of racism, but anti-Semitism, my booklet on anti-Semitism, something that we have made available, and some of the questions as to whether or not the back and forth between the president and a couple of members of Congress are necessarily helpful, whether or not criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism, or whether criticism of Israel to exist is anti-Semitism, and even some of the what are called ignorant comments by the president about Israel. So we'll certainly try to cover a lot of that in the first hour. In the second hour today, I might just mention that we're going to focus a fairly significant amount of time on the whole question of climate change. As a matter of fact, if you go to our website today, you'll see my booklet on a biblical point of view on climate change, because we're going to be talking in the second hour today with Dr. Bruce Bunker, who's had, I think, about 100 different refereed articles that appeared in Science and Science Magazine and others, talking about his book, The Mythology of Global Warming, which relates a little bit to my commentary yesterday on whether or not last month, July 2019, was the hottest month in the history of Earth, because it was, from at least the temperature measurements on the terrestrial level, hotter than July 2016. But as I point out in my commentary by climatologist Roy Spencer, it wasn't the hottest if you look at it with a little more objectivity. So we'll get into all of that in the second hour. But what about this idea of crazy commentary? My commentary today is really based upon a piece that was written by Tucker Carlson and another individual, which was basically titled, "Take a Breath, America's Still a Decent Country Filled with Decent People." And what he did was spend a fair amount of time talking about ways in which some of the individuals in the media right now have come up with just really bizarre kinds of commentary. And one example I thought I would use, which is a perfect lead into our first article on the website, was an individual who was complaining on one of the news shows that the flags were going to fly half-mast, in honor of the shootings in El Paso and Dayton, until August 8th. And the commentator made a big deal about that, because August 8 would be 8/8, and you still go, and so? Well, the argument he made is that 8 is the eighth letter, H is the eighth letter in the alphabet, so 8/8 would be HH, and so that means Heil Hitler. And I mean, at this point, you just say, you're looking for Nazism, racism in the most obscure places possible, and it's almost hard to take some of that seriously. So let me just say that if you'd like to read the commentary, it's on the website today, and it's just a reminder of how sometimes some of these commentaries have been almost unhinged. Well, you don't have to look just at commentators to find some unhinged comments. You can see that with some of our presidential candidates. This piece by Rich Lowry reminds us that former member of Congress and now presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke has said this country, though we'd like to think otherwise, was founded on racism, has persisted through racism, and is racist today. I'd take it a little more seriously if they were to say we've had some racist roots, but we don't have Jim Crow laws today, and we may have some hidden racism, but it's not, I mean, you can't even make that statement. It's just as racist today as it was when it was founded. And, of course, I quote also, he quotes Bernie Sanders, who says that the United States was created on the racist principles. And that leads, of course, to the New York Times establishing what's called the 1619 Project, which is marking the 400th anniversary of the first slaves that came to America from Africa. And as Rich Lowry says, this series seeks nothing less than to reframe the country's history, understanding 1619 is our true founding and placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of black Americans at the very center of the story. We tell us of ourselves of who we are. That's a direct quote. And first of all, he acknowledges that, it is certainly true, as we would all admit, that America existed as a nation prior to the Declaration in 1776. So if you want to say the country started in 1776, I think that's accurate politically. If you want to say that the founding of the continent, which eventually became the United States, began before, you can use 1620 with the Pilgrims, but of course the New York Times wants to use 1619 and Jamestown. And if you want to acknowledge that slavery, and I would acknowledge, was the greatest sin of America, perhaps that is certainly reasonable as well. But then he has three it doesn't explain kinds of points that he's going to make. And the first is this idea that racism is at the very essence of America. Number one, he says, doesn't explain why any reference to slavery was kept out of the Constitution. Rich Lowry says that James Madison, according to his notes during the drafting convention, thought it wrong to admit in the Constitution the idea that there could be property in men. The careful avoidance of the term slavery was subsequently used to buttress the opposition and the position of opponents of slavery, from John Quincy Adams to Abraham Lincoln to Frederick Douglass. The great black abolitionists asked if the Constitution were intended to be by the framers and adopters a slave-holding instrument, why neither slavery, slave-holding, nor slave can be found anywhere in it. Great line there from Frederick Douglass. The second thing it doesn't explain is the passage of the Northwest Ordinance in 1787, prior to the adoption of the Constitution, setting out the terms of the settlement of the Great Lakes and Ohio River, and it stipulated that there shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory. And number three, it doesn't explain why the Constitution permitted the prohibition of the importation of slaves as of 1808, which it indeed prohibited. So he says, of course, in many ways, the Constitution was a compromise with the slaveholders. If you're not familiar, I might just point out that if you look at the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, one of the concerns raised by many was that the British Empire was allowing slavery when some of the colonists were trying to abolish it. But, of course, that was removed in order to get South Carolina and Georgia to sign it. And we can go through a little bit more, but I'll take that after the break to just simply say that there's going to be a real drumbeat now based upon this 1619 project established by the New York Times. And so this is one of those issues that is front and center, and one of the reasons I made these the first and second articles on our website. I'll come back and say a little bit more about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, in the midst of all the criticism of this country and its citizens, I try to provide some positive material. In that vein, I posted an article co-authored by Tucker Carlson that had the hopeful title, "Take a Breath. America's still a decent country filled with decent people." But when it came time to discuss the article, my roundtable guests focused on the stories the two authors gave of what could be called crazy commentary. If you want an example of how some in the media have become unhinged, pay attention. One of the guests on MSNBC accused President Trump of giving subliminal orders to disenfranchised white people. The president may have a number of faults, but being subliminal isn't one of them. If he's thinking it, he says it. Another guest made a big deal about the fact that the flags would fly half-mast until August 8th. He pointed out that that is 8/8. So what? He reminds us that the number is significant in the neo-Nazi and white supremacy movement because the letter H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. So apparently 8/8 is HH, which stands for Heil Hitler. Does that mean we can no longer use the number 8 since it's a racist number? Another guest tried to argue that the President of the United States has been talking about exterminating Latinos. Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote than Mitt Romney. But don't let that get in the way of the over-the-top rhetoric being spoken by commentators who obviously hate the president. Mind you, these are just a few of the examples that appear in this article. You can find many more. And it's a long way to the November 2020 elections. Most of us are already worn out by such crazy commentary, but we still have 15 months left to go. I don't blame you for wanting to turn off your television and canceling your newspaper subscription. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that we have the piece by Rich Lowry, which his title actually says Beto and the Press Throw America Under the Bus, but I just simply retitled it, Does America Have Racist Roots? And we certainly can acknowledge that slavery was legal when the country was founded and slaves were brought for the first time to Jamestown in 1619. But to have a whole 1619 project, as you're going to see in just a minute, actually I think does more harm to even Black History Month and Black history than it helps. But I'll leave that for just a minute. I think Rich Lowry's argument is to say that racism is the very foundation of America. He gives you 3 examples in a short column that it doesn't explain why you don't see the word slavery in the Constitution. And Frederick Douglass made a big deal about that. Of course, so did John Quincy Adams, an abolitionist. Abraham Lincoln, of course, an abolitionist as well. And that was one of the reasons for the founding of the Republican Party. Doesn't explain, of course, why you have, even in the Northwest Ordinance, which goes back to 1787, even before you have the Constitution, not allowing slavery in those territories. And then, of course, the whole prohibition of importation of slaves shortly thereafter. But don't take my word for it, and don't even take the word for it of Rich Lowry. How about historian Gordon Wood? If you look on my shelf of some of the books for American history, you will see quite a few books by Gordon Wood, and he is an individual that is well accepted and respected. And rather than enhancing the moral standing of slavery, his argument is the founding actually tried to undermine it. Here's what Gordon Wood said, quote, "The revolution suddenly and effectively ended the cultural climate that had allowed black slavery as well as other forms of bondage and unfreedom to exist throughout the colonial period without serious challenge. He went on to say that, in his view, it set in motion the ideological and social forces that eventually, of course, led to the Civil War. Another quote that he has comes from Elizabeth Fox Genovese and Eugene Genovese. She was on the program, decades ago, so you may not be familiar with those historians. But in their book, The Mind of the Master Class, they actually said that Europeans did not outdo others in enslaving people or treating slavery viciously. They outdid others by creating a Christian civilization that eventually stirred moral condemnation of slavery and roused mass movements against it. Perception of slavery as morally unacceptable, as sinful, did not become widespread until the second half of the 18th century. Today we ask, how could Christians or any civilized people have lived with themselves as slaveholders? But the historically appropriate question is, what, after millennia of general acceptance, made Christians, and subsequently those of other faiths, judge slavery an enormity not to be endured? And again, we can look back and say there were those who made their peace with slavery or took it for granted, but the argument that they are making there is the whole growth of the abolition movement came from Christians who finally said, wait a minute, this is wrong, and how have we allowed this to take place? And whether it's William Wilberforce standing in the well of the British Parliament calling for an end of the slave trade, whether it is the whole abolition movement, which was part and parcel of the Second Great Awakening, even part, interesting enough, of some of the First Great Awakening, though some of the evangelists themselves condoned slavery, it illustrates again that there is almost an attempt to put history on top of its head by saying that it wasn't the Christians that brought about the change. I think really it was. And that brings us to the next article, this one by Jim Garrity, What the 1619 Project Leaves Out. If you're familiar with the New York Times major initiative right now, it is what's called the 1619 Project. It basically wants to say that the birth year of the nation is 1619, not 1776, or not even 1620, which would be the establishment of Plymouth Colony, because they want to focus on the contribution of black Americans, as it says, and more importantly, wants us to recognize that this rests upon a racist foundation. Now, Jim Garrity puts it this way: the scale of the opening offering is massive, he says, in terms of the standards of modern journalism. 100 pages with a few ads, 10 essays, a photo essay, and a collection of original poems and stories from 16 additional writers. And he says the 1619 Project is an effort to reframe American history. But he says in order to do so, it requires cropping out some significant figures in African American history. Perhaps no near 100-page collection of essays, poems, and photos could cover every single figure in African American history or black history. But the number of prominent figures who never even get mentioned or only get the most cursory treatment, he says, is pretty surprising. So I won't go through all of those, but again, it is our second article for you to read. First of all, let's go to the American Revolution. Now, no surprise there that one of the individuals mentioned is Crispus Attucks, who actually gets mentioned 3 times. But he, as far as I can tell, he says, is the lone black Revolutionary War combatant who is mentioned. So that's about it. Then you have James Armistead, who was a spy for Lafayette, who had access to General Cornwall's headquarters. Back in 1996, New York Times wrote about the 1st Rhode Island Regiment that fought in Newport. But again, scant comments about any African Americans during the Revolutionary War, which is understandable. But then you have others. You have Martin Delany was an abolitionist, the first African American accepted to Harvard Medical School. Unfortunately, in that particular case, white students forced him out. The first African American field grade officer in the U.S. Army, but he's only quoted in passing. By the time you get to the 1800s, you had about 179,000 black men that were enlisted in what at that time were called the U.S. Colored Troops. I'm sorry, but that's what they were called back then. Almost 10% of the entire Union Army, but they're not even mentioned. Okay, that's 10% of the Union Army, African Americans, part of what was called the Colored Troops. They're not even mentioned in the 1619 Project. The Buffalo Soldiers, again, African American, they're not mentioned in the 1619 Project as well. Okay, let's fast forward because we're getting close to the end of our section here. And that is you have the Harlem Hellfighters, which were fighting in World War I, but there's no mention of them in the 1619 Project. If you go to Pearl Harbor, probably one of the people that figures very significantly in couple of scenes in the movie Pearl Harbor is Dory Miller and his heroism at Pearl Harbor. No mention there as well. They do talk about the Tuskegee study of Negro men, but they'd never mention the Tuskegee Airmen during World War II, if you can believe that. Frederick Douglass, who I quoted just a few minutes ago, is mentioned twice. W.E.B. Du Bois is mentioned once. Thurgood Marshall is mentioned once. Here are all the ones, and I won't even give you the whole list. It's just unbelievable. Harriet Tubman, never mentioned. Booker T. Washington, never mentioned. Bishop Richard Allen, who founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, never mentioned. I can go on and on, but I think you get the point here. We have an attempt to supposedly focus our time and attention on African American history or black history, but the 1619 Project, I think, shows itself for what it really is. It's just one more attempt to say that it's a racist nation, and I think in part maybe is explained by the current campaign. For 2 years, we've been hearing the word Russia, 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 Russia. That hasn't worked very well. So right now we're starting to hear another R, and that is recession, recession, recession. But at the moment, we don't have a recession, although we might certainly by election time next year. So they're bringing out another R, and that's racism, racism, racism. And if nothing else, I think if you're an African American that really would like to have accurate history of those contributions that have come from black Americans, and you look at this 1619 Project, I think you should be appalled because it looks much more political than it looks historical. It looks like it has a political agenda rather than an attempt to even try to bring some kind of balance to the way in which we cover history. But that's my point of view, and if you want to agree or disagree, you're welcome to do so. But when we come back, I want to move from racism to anti-Semitism because there's been a lot of point-counterpoint charges between the president and two members of Congress. And so we want to talk about what anti-Semitism means, what it doesn't mean. And I might just mention tomorrow we're going to have Jim Dennison talking about his essay, which I think is going to be very instructive as well. So we have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. When we talk about racism, I've said before that term is thrown around so much that when everybody's called a racist, nobody's a racist. But one of the other terms thrown around a little bit too much is anti-Semitism. One of the reasons we wrote a booklet on anti-Semitism in part was to simply get an accurate definition of that, but at the same time recognize that people like Ilhan Omar and others, and I'm going to talk about a couple others, Rashida Tlaib, sometimes say some things that may qualify as that. And tomorrow I'm going to be talking with Jim Dennison, but his column that came out the other day said, here's the article I wish I was writing. The daughter of Palestinian immigrants is elected to U.S. Congress, shining light on the significance of the Palestinian people. She returns to the West Bank to visit her elderly grandmother and inspire Palestinians with her work of hard work and success. But he said, unfortunately, that's not the story I can write. Instead, he says, Rashida Tlaib serves in the U.S. House of Representatives from the 13th District there in Michigan. And before her election, she was the first Muslim woman to serve in the Michigan state legislature. She has been extremely critical of Israel. Well, that's okay. I mean, it's okay to criticize Israel. I'm going to use a piece from Dennis Prager in just a minute to say anybody, even Israelis, criticize Israel. That's not the point. But then she's called for an end to U.S. aid to Israel, expressed support for the boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions program. This is a Palestinian-led campaign, Jim Dennison says, promoting boycotts against Israel, the divesting of investments in the state of Israel, and sanctions against the Israeli government. After dozens of lawmakers participated in a congressional delegation to Israel, Representative Tlaib and her colleague, fellow Muslim Representative Ilhan Omar, decided to make their own trip. It was planned by a group that's called MIFTA, and this is unfortunately one that has raised some very significant questions because, as David French, who we quote quite often here on Point of View, notes in the National Review, MIFTA is actually an anti-Semitic organization that frequently produces vitriolic, hateful rhetoric. For instance, it published a neo-Nazi treatise condemning Jew-controlled entertainment media, claiming to permit Jews with their 3,000-year history of nation-wrecking to hold such a power over us as tantamount to race suicide. You get the idea. I won't even read the rest, okay? And honored female suicide bombers and a variety of other issues. So the point that we discussed a little bit yesterday, I wasn't part of it, but certainly Nick Pitts and Chelsea Human did, was that whole issue. And so it is one thing to criticize Israel. It's another thing to actually call for the end of the nation of Israel. And this brings us to another section, and that is just the shocking spike in anti-Semitism that Jim Dennison writes about. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we do so, let me read from this piece by Dennis Prager. It's called Criticism of Israel is Not Anti-Semitism, Anti-Zionism Is. And so he really helps us get a clear understanding. In the midst of people throwing terms around, Nazi, Jew hater, anti-Semite, racist, on and on and on. There are just so many of these terms that get thrown around. It's good to get some clarity. And once again, we come to Dennis Prager for a little bit of clarity. He starts his piece by saying this. Imagine a group of people who work to destroy Italy because they claim Italy's origins are illegitimate. Imagine further that these people maintain that of all the countries in the world, only Italy is illegitimate. And then imagine that these people vigorously deny that they are in any way at all anti-Italian. And he says, or asks, would you believe them? Or would you dismiss their argument as not only dishonest, but absurd? And he said, substitute Israel for Italy and Jew for Italian, and you'll understand the dishonesty and absurdity of the argument that one can be anti-Zionist but not anti-Semitic. That is precisely what the anti-Zionists are saying. They argue that the very existence of the Jewish state in the geographical area known as Palestine, that there was never an independent country known as Palestine is illegitimate. They do not believe any other country in the world is illegitimate, no matter how bloody its origins, and they get offended when they're accused of being anti-Semitic. So he says, well, how do they make their argument? Well, he says, first, they change the topic. They say it's unfair to charge those who merely criticize Israel with being anti-Semitic. But I don't know anyone who does that, says Dennis Prager. It's a phony argument. Criticism of Israel is fine. Denying Israel's right to exist is not. Anti-Zionism is not criticism of Israel. Anti-Zionism is opposition to Israel's existence. And then he goes on to give us a little history. He says Zionism is the movement for the return of Jews to their ancient homeland, Israel. Over the past 3,000 years, there have been two independent Jewish states located in what is today called Israel. Both were destroyed by invaders, and no Arab or Muslim or any other independent country ever existed in that land, which was only named Palestine by the Romans in an attempt to remove all memory of the Jewish state they destroyed in the year AD 70. Second, he says, anti-Zionists claim that they can't be anti-Jewish because Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. That, too, is equally false, Dennis Prager says. It is the same as saying Italy has nothing to do with being Italian. I love that line. Judaism has always been consistent of three components: God, the Torah, and Israel. If Israel isn't part of Judaism, neither is the Bible or God. Third, he says anti-Zionists claim that Judaism is only a religion. Therefore, Jews are only members of a religion, not a nation. But the Jews are called what? The nation of Israel, repeatedly in the Bible. That is why there are irreligious, secular, and even atheistic Jews, because Jews are not only a religion. There are no atheist Christians because Christianity is only a religion. He says, fourth, anti-Zionists claim that Israel is illegitimate because it's racist. This is a charge Israel haters and America haters make against the two least racist societies in the world, he says. In the case of Israel, it is fraudulent because, number one, half of Israel's Jews are not white. Number two, anyone of any race or ethnicity can become a Jew. Three, out of every 5 Jews, 1 out of every 5 Jews is not, got it wrong. 1 out of every 5 Israelis is not a Jew. These are Israeli citizens. Most of them are Arab Muslims and have the same rights as Jewish Israelis. And then finally, Israel's control of the West Bank has nothing to do with race. Israel does not control the West Bank because Palestinians are of another race, but because Palestinians tried to destroy Israel in 1967 and lost the war. The only reason Palestinians do not have their own state has nothing to do with race. They rejected offers to found their own state on 5 separate occasions since 1948. They've always rejected building a Palestinian state because they have a greater interest in destroying Israel. And then finally, fifth, he says, the anti-Zionists claim that Israel's origins are illegitimate. And Dennis Prager puts it this way. He said the fact that of all the world's 200-plus countries, the only country anti-Zionists declare illegitimate is also the only Jewish country is pretty much all you need to know about their motives. Why, for example, don't they make this claim about Pakistan? In 1947, 3 months before the establishment of Israel, India was partitioned into a Muslim state, Pakistan, and a Hindu state, India. Unlike Israel, Pakistan had never existed before. Unlike Israel's founding, which created about 700,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands and 700,000 Arab refugees from what became Israel, the founding of Pakistan created more than 7 million Muslim refugees from India and about 7 million Hindu refugees from Pakistan. And while the highest estimate of Arab deaths in the fighting that took place when Israel announced its establishment is 10,000, the number of deaths that resulted in Pakistan's creation is around 1 million. So he says, given these facts, why is Israel's legitimacy challenged while the legitimacy of Pakistan isn't? There's only one answer. Israel is the one Jewish state in the world. So while there are 49 Muslim-majority countries and 22 Arab states, anti-Zionists reject the right of one Jewish state, that is Israel, the size of New Jersey, to exist. He says, of course, not all anti-Zionists hate all Jews, but as I wrote at the beginning, if you seek to destroy Italy, You don't have to hate every Italian to be anti-Italian. If you seek to destroy the only Jewish state on earth, you don't have to hate every Jew to be an anti-Semite. So it's a commentary by Dennis Prager on that question of anti-Semitism. When we come back, just briefly, a couple of comments about some of these statements made by the president, as well as just this shocking rise in anti-Semitism around the world. And one of the two booklets we're making available, of course, I'll mention this one on anti-Semitism. Next hour, of course, we're going to be talking about this idea of climate change. And that booklet you can order today. Get a free copy just simply going to the website pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation about anti-Semitism right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, as I've said early in this hour, sometimes the phrase or the word racism is misused, and certainly the phrase or word anti-Semitism is misused. And I think just for a minute, let me mention the president. You know, we could do a whole hour on that, but there's no point in it. But more recently, the president speaking in the Oval Office said, where has the Democratic Party gone? Where have they gone when they're defending these two people? Of course, he's talking about Tlaib and Omar, over the state of Israel. And I think any Jewish people that vote for a Democrat, I think, is either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. And one of the things I appreciate about Jim Garrity is he sometimes asks a good question, then gives us three responses. He says, disloyalty to whom? He gives us three ideas. disloyalty to Israel. And he's saying, well, is Donald Trump and President Trump suggesting that American Jews owe a loyalty to Israel in a year when American Jews have bristled at the accusation of two loyalties from Ilhan Omar? Is President Trump arguing that not only do American Jews have loyalty to two countries, but they ought to? I think that's a little bit over the top. But nevertheless, disloyalty to what? Okay, disloyalty to him. I think that may be what he was implying, but maybe not in loyalty to the principle. But again, Americans pledge allegiance to a flag, he says, in the country for which it stands, not a particular leader or politician. If the choice is binary, as so many have insisted about in 2016 and are sure to insist again in 2020, then Trump's statement that voting for a Democratic Party that defends Omar and Tlaib is disloyal amounts to a contention that being a loyal Jew requires voting for him, which maybe is what he meant, I don't know. Or the number three, disloyal to themselves or the community. And there's where you have the Republican Jewish Coalition. The director, his name is Matt Brooks, and he's talked about this as well. And it seems to suggest that they're working against their own best interest. Let's try to, again, have a little bit of a nuance in this. We've had Gary Bauer on this program and others that have been very loyal to the nation of Israel. As a matter of fact, I suspect Jim Dennison tomorrow will probably talk about that as well, that will say sometimes I have difficulty understanding why people that are Jewish do not support Israel, and I don't understand why individuals that are Jewish don't come out with greater arguments against Tlaib and Omar, Representatives Tlaib and Omar. But nevertheless, that's just more, to me, to be something that should be expressed as kind of a head-scratcher rather than to say that they were disloyal. And that's not the only set of comments by the president. Matter of fact, his tweets today are kind of over the top, and I'll just spare you because after a while there's only so much you can say about some of the things that come from the president's Twitter feed. But I wanted to come to the end of this by talking about something that, if nothing else, is a very significant prayer target. If you look at my booklet on anti-Semitism, or you read the piece that we'll be talking about tomorrow with Jim Dennison, he talks about a shocking spike in anti-Semitism. And in my booklet and in his daily article, we document some of those. But let's just give you a few indications of how unbelievably this has happened. He talks about, for example, in the Sunday Times reporting a number of Jews who have moved from the United Kingdom to Israel because of rising anti-Semitism at home. Now, that's pretty striking because I also point out in one of these surveys that was done asking about some of those individuals themselves who find themselves in other European countries also who felt that they needed to move because the level of anti-Semitism in their countries was rising. But now this is being documented even in the UK, in England. A new report says anti-Semitic incidents in Britain have spiked to the highest level since records began in 1984. Okay, let's move from England to France. A Jewish cemetery in France was vandalized last May. A recent survey found that 89% of Jews living in Europe feel anti-Semitism has increased in their country over the last decade. Another report found that anti-Semitic acts in France increased in 2018 by more than 70% compared to the previous year. Then, Jim Dennison says closer to home, a man who allegedly threatened to carry out a shooting at a Jewish community center in Ohio has been arrested. And he said a recent survey found that 1 in 5 Americans, about 30% of young adults, do not believe that the Nazi regime exterminated 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, the so-called Holocaust deniers. And then the Hudson Institute warns that America is facing a shocking spike in anti-Semitism. And in addition to traditional sources on the extreme right, this time it includes left-wing progressives and Islamicists as well. And I might just mention that in the next presidential debate, you're going to hear people talking about how the hate crimes listed by the FBI have increased dramatically. And first of all, when you look at some of those things listed as hate crimes, unless you consider vandalism as a hate crime, and if you do, fine. I'm just saying that it's not a violent crime. It's something that sometimes is even done by perpetrators trying to gain sympathy for themselves. We found that some of these hate crimes are actually done by people trying to call attention to their issue, and they actually were the perpetrators, not the victim. But, okay, even if you accept the FBI numbers for hate crimes, one of the things that you won't hear mentioned probably is half of those hate crimes are anti-Semitic. They're against Jewish people. So the argument is oftentimes, well, this just shows that racism is alive and well in America. There may be racists in America, I'm not denying that, but really it's anti-Semitism that's alive and well in America, and that sometimes just gets left out. So finally, Jim Dennison spends a little bit of time saying, explaining anti-Semitism. Whatever we think of Israel's relationship with the Palestinians or any other political issue, we should be careful to diligently and passionately rule against any kind of hatred of Jewish people. Anti-Semitism is one part racial discrimination, a sin in which people who feel inferior to others can pretend to be superior on the basis of ethnicity or skin color, and it's one part jealousy and resentment because, after all, Jews are people of the book and have always been highly literate and have proven themselves successful in nearly every vocation. One example he uses is that though Jews constitute about 2% of the American population, they've received 37% of all U.S. Nobel Prizes. And so you can see that part of it is that, but I think it's a spiritual issue as well. To think of all these Arab nations so upset that there is a country that's no bigger than the size of New Jersey and are convinced that the problems in the Middle East all go back to this small Jewish nation, I think just shows you that it's oftentimes much more of a spiritual battle than it is even a political one. And of course, one of the other points he makes is anti-Semitism grieves the heart of God, who said to the Jewish people, Isaiah 43, verse 4, "You are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you." And who also says to the rest of us, whether we're Jews, Gentiles, Palestinians, or Americans, he loved us and sent his son as a sacrifice to take away our sins, 1 John 4:10. So if nothing else, there's just a reminder once again of this growing issue of anti-Semitism. But if we're going to actually talk about anti-Semitism, I think it's really incumbent upon us to make sure that we properly identify it. And that's one of the reasons I took some time to talk about that this hour. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, one of the things I want to make available to you is my booklet on climate change. And we're going to spend some time talking with Dr. Bruce Bunker about his book, The Mythology of Global Warming. And if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, we certainly welcome your phone calls. That number is 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to find some of the other articles we've posted today about whether America is a racist nation, the 619 Project, and much more, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversations right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to be talking about the subject of climate change. And of course, one of the things we are making available to you is my little booklet on a biblical point of view on climate change, which takes you through some of the science, but just very briefly, as well as some of the political implications and some of the policies, and then recommend some other books that are out there that might be helpful to you. It is a topic we address so often. As a matter of fact, my Viewpoints commentary yesterday was whether or not June of this last month was the hottest month in the history of the world, because if you look at the surface temperature measurements, it was hotter than July of 2016. But of course, I quote from climatologist Dr. Roy Spencer, who's been on the program, arguing that it was not the warmest if you use other kinds of measurements. But it also gets us into this ongoing debate and discussion about the Green New Deal, climate change, and much more. So one of the books that came across my desk is this book called The Mythology of Global Warming, Climate Change Fiction versus Scientific Facts. And it is full of great scientific evidence and information that will help you to understand this debate. And it is written by Dr. Bruce Bunker, who received his Ph.D. in inorganic chemistry from the University of Illinois, has worked as a staff scientist and technical manager in a variety of different locations. If you say, well, what has been his publishing experience? He's published over 100 peer-reviewed publications in journals like Science and Scientific American. And so I thought it would be good to give you a very in-depth look at this issue of climate change, global warming, from an individual that has obviously looked at it from a scientific point of view. So, Dr. Bruce Bunker, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on, Kerby, because, you know, every day everybody in America is being barraged by warnings that the end of the world is due because we're using fossil fuels, which cause human-induced global warming. And because of the stranglehold of the media, most of your listeners probably don't have a chance to hear the other side of this important issue. And so in this broadcast, I'd like to really just cover two things. Most of the time, I guess we'll spend covering the fact that the global warming narrative is completely fictional if you really look at hard scientific and historical facts. But the other thing, which I'm just going to mention here briefly at the beginning, is that if you really want to worry about something, the real threat to most Americans today is not global warming. It's the global warming movement. This movement is demanding that the U.S. abolish the use of all fossil fuels. But if you look at it, abundant and affordable energy based on fossil fuels is what powers the American way of life. And the premise that renewable energy can magically replace all of this is nonsense. If you eliminate fossil fuels, you will cripple America. All of this is encapsulated in the Green New Deal that you mentioned. And I don't know if I need to go into that. Maybe just give you the punchline. They're saying that because the planet's going to end in 12 years if we don't halt fossil fuel emissions, we need to have a crash plan called the Green New Deal that's going to call for total elimination of fossil fuels within the next 10 years. And the implications of that are, if you include methane from livestock, all oil and livestock industries critical to the economy are going to be destroyed. Over 90% of all energy in the U.S. is to be eliminated. All vehicles having internal combustion engines, including cars, trucks, trains, and ships, are to be banned. Air travel is to be abolished. Heavy industry like blast furnaces used to make steel will be abolished. Farm equipment used to plant, harvest, and transport food will be eliminated. You can't have a military because the Air Force, Navy, and Army all depend on fossil fuels and nuclear energy. The net thing is that the federal government's going to seize control of the entire energy sector, and what they're going to do is ramp up enormous renewable energy and things like a high-speed rail system to replace our freeway system that is estimated to cost over $100 trillion, which is 5 times our gross domestic product. So the question I think your viewers need to ponder is the Earth really going to end if we don't do something in 12 years? Are such extreme measures really called for? And do we really need the Green New Deal in order to save the planet? And in my opinion, I'm really scared by this because politicians are seriously talking about destroying the U.S. in order to have a negligible impact on a problem that doesn't even exist. And this is the main reason I want to provide your listeners with some facts so they can really evaluate whether policies like this make any sense at all.
And I might just mention that if you wanted to know the cost that would affect you, my commentary that came out August 15th is talking about the cost of the Green New Deal based on some of the work by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Most of you heard me talk about this before. They looked at a couple of different states, Florida, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, all places where we broadcast, and concluded that in those 4 states, the typical cost for a household would be an additional $70,000. For those of you that I'm going to see in about a week up in Alaska, that's up $100,000. So whether you look at the impact on the economy generally or as individuals, it would be very expensive. And as people like Bjorn Lomborg and others have pointed out, it would, as you said, have a negligible impact. But just for a minute, let's put some history here, because your first chapter reminds us that not so long ago, the real concern was not global warming, and I'm old enough to remember this, and the other day Colonel Alan West, who was in the studio with us, remembers that back in the early 1970s, there was a real concern that, if anything, the planet would be affected by global cooling. So we went from a time where the biggest threat was global cooling in the 1970s to now the argument is the greatest threat is global warming. That should tell you something, shouldn't it, Bruce?
And if you look at what they were claiming was the cause of the global cooling, it's exactly the same things they're saying are due to causing global warming, namely the evil oil industries were making the planet cool.
So let's, if we can, just get into a couple of issues real quickly. One of those is a graph that is very famous because Al Gore made it famous, and it's called the hockey stick, Michael Mann, which he's showing the temperature is kind of the same, and then all of a sudden it jumps way high at the very end. And one of the reasons you say that that is erroneous, even though it still shows up all the time, is it fails to go back a little bit further and recognize that we've had a medieval warming period. We've had a little ice age. We're kind of in a warming period. And if you just look at a small section of time, it looks like we're headed for a massive amount of global warming. But after we come back from the break, I want you to begin to explain some of the history of that, because that's what is giving the impetus for people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others promoting the Green New Deal. And next month, when we have some of the Democratic debates, we're going to hear again the need that we have an existential threat. And if we don't act right now, we're going to have the various levels of the ocean rise too great. We're going to overheat the planet. Of course, you have some even suggesting it's actually too late, and you're going to have to look for high ground anyway because the ocean levels are already going to go up because it's too late. So I want you to come back and begin to deal with some of what you call the climate change fiction, and we'll continue to do that with Dr. Bruce Bunker right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, in the midst of all the criticism of this country and its citizens, I try to provide some positive material. In that vein, I posted an article co-authored by Tucker Carlson that had the hopeful title, "Take a Breath. America's Still a Decent Country Filled with Decent People." But when it came time to discuss the article, my roundtable guests focused on the stories the two authors gave of what could be called crazy commentary. If you want an example of how some in the media have become unhinged, pay attention. One of the guests on MSNBC accused President Trump of giving subliminal orders to disenfranchised white people. The president may have a number of faults, but being subliminal isn't one of them. If he's thinking it, he says it. Another guest made a big deal about the fact that the flags would fly half-mast until August 8th. He pointed out that that is 8/8. So what? He reminds us that the number is significant in the neo-Nazi and white supremacy movement because the letter H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. So apparently 8/8 is HH, which stands for Heil Hitler. Does that mean we can no longer use the number 8 since it's a racist number? Another guest tried to argue that the President of the United States has been talking about exterminating Latinos. Donald Trump received a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote than Mitt Romney. But don't let that get in the way of the over-the-top rhetoric being spoken by commentators who obviously hate the president. Mind you, these are just a few of the examples that appear in this article. You can find many more, and it's a long way to the November 2020 elections. Most of us are already worn out by such crazy commentary, but we still have 15 months left to go. I don't blame you for wanting to turn off your television and canceling your newspaper subscription. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, in theaters this Friday. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Our topic is climate change. Again, let me just mention this little booklet on a biblical point of view on climate change recommends 5 different books, 2 on climate change, and then 3 on kind of how do Christians think about the issue of the environment, because Christians should be good stewards of the environment, and I will come back to that topic maybe in a future broadcast. But today, just want to focus on this issue of climate change. And one of these books that we found out about that's not on that bibliography, but we'll list it next time, is this book, The Mythology of Global Warming. And it is a book that we now have available on pointofview.net. It will link you to where you can get the paperback version or the Kindle version. It is more scientific. I have science background, but I found it very readable and easy to read. But again, this might be something that would be helpful if you've got a friend that's really into science and saying, you know, I don't know about you people that don't believe in climate change. You know, this is a real dangerous existential threat. Why don't you believe in that? And you say, well, I'm not sure I understand all the science, but this book really goes into it and really does a very healthy critique of some of the things that are being said. And so you might get the book for them, but I think as you read it, you'll be able to understand some of these issues as well. What about this, Bruce? We have Andrew Yang, presidential candidate, saying that it's really too late. The oceans are going to rise. You better just find higher ground because the ocean levels are going to rise. Even in his Inconvenient Truth documentary, Al Gore said that the ocean level is going to rise 20 feet. Not even the IPCC said that. What about all this threat that we are in the midst of a major environmental crisis? How do we respond to some of this?
Okay, actually, I have a list of questions that people need to ponder that go into all of this. And the issue about ice and sea levels falls under the category of what are the consequences of global warming and why is it bad? And these questions include, is all the ice about to melt and are sea levels going to wipe out coastal cities and civilizations? The answers to both of those are no and no. Is global warming causing catastrophic increases in extreme weather? The answer is no. Is life on Earth about to become extinct due to global warming? The answer is no. But before we get into those questions, none of these questions matter if humans aren't causing any of this in the first place.
Right.
So I think the more important questions are, is carbon dioxide what controls the Earth's climate? How are humans controlling the Earth's climate? Do greenhouse gases control the Earth's climate? Does CO2 control the Earth's climate? The answer to all those questions are no. So I don't know, which set of questions do you want to start with?
Well, first of all, I think most people, when they hear that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going up, they don't realize what a very small fraction of that is in the first place. And so that's one way to go. But also, I guess maybe it goes back to that hockey stick idea that most people are unaware of the fact that we've had a Roman warming period, we've had ice ages, we've had a medieval warming period, and now, so these climate changes took place long before we were burning fossil fuels, long before we had coal-fired plants, long before we had SUVs. True?
Absolutely true. And in fact, we can look at that right now if you want. So they have temperature records that go on almost any time scale you want to pick, except the ones, of course, that the climate change guys use. And you can also, and the temperature is never constant. The climate has never been constant. It's going up and down all the time. One thing people don't realize also is that carbon dioxide levels have never been constant. They are going up and down all the time. And in fact, if you look at some of the claims that they're making, like this is the hottest that it's ever been, and CO2 levels are as high as they've ever been, it's baloney. For example, CO2 levels. The original atmosphere of the planet was, instead of nitrogen and oxygen, it was nitrogen and CO2. Concentration was 300,000 parts per million compared to 400 parts per million today. In fact, the current concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is lower than it's been, except for all but about 1% of the entire history of the Earth.
Yes. And you've got a graph on that for people to see that if they're visual learners. Go ahead.
Yes, and you don't even have to go back that far. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere when the Egyptians were building the pyramids was 500 parts per million, which is 100 parts per million higher than it is today.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that humans are even in control of the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere is open to question. And certainly, as far as temperatures go, it's nonsense. You mentioned the Little Ice Age and the medieval warm period. Well, those are just two major oscillations that have occurred since the end of the last ice age. There have been like 6 or 7 of these periods where the climate got a lot warmer and then it got a lot colder. And that's even discounting an ice age. But
And one way to illustrate that, by the way, is one of the various islands in the news right now has been Greenland, because the argument is President Trump wants to buy Greenland, and that's why he's not going to Denmark now, because Denmark was making fun of him. But there was a time in which Greenland was green, and it is not as green today. You might remember your old geography. Sometimes they would say it's green in Iceland and ice in Greenland. But there was a time when Greenland was very green, and that really allowed for the flourishing of the Vikings during the medieval period. There was a time in which they actually raised grapes and wine in England. So you can recognize that when people say it's never been this warm, I say just go back 1,000 years and you have something that looks almost exactly like what we have right now. And warmer is better than colder unless you really like ice ages and glaciers covering vast areas of the planet and preventing you from being able to plant crops. Is that fair?
Absolutely. In fact, I was in Iceland a couple of years ago, and they were all, oh, look, global warming is making the main glacier retreat. But they have a museum right on the site, and it shows all of the advances and retreats that have occurred in the Iceland glaciers since the end of the last ice age. And it turns out that, yeah, the glaciers are retreating right now, but there's more ice in Iceland now than there was when the Vikings colonized Iceland in the first place.
Yep, and that's on page 36. So again, you've got great diagrams, you've got great graphs, and for people that are sometimes saying, okay, I may not understand all the technical stuff here. I mean, I'm not a chemist, and you do take us occasionally into some chemistry. Just looking at the graphs and the charts are things that you're saying, okay, these should be covered. I mean, a fair assessment of where we are in terms of Earth history would want to look at a little bit more of that past history. But Bruce, I think you've actually discovered that these kinds of diagrams show up in a couple of the books that I recommend, but it's simply not covered. And is that due to a bias, you think, in terms of the media, or is it just that most journalists never had to take a science class?
Bias is the short one-word answer. And in fact, if you mentioned Michael Mann's curve,
yes,
that curve is fictional. He deliberately eliminated the Little Ice Age and the medieval warm period to make it look like the industrial age was controlling everything, which is not true. Even the modern climate, you mentioned the warnings about we were going to descend into an ice age in the 70s. That was actually based on real climate data, where the climate has been oscillating between warm and cool periods, even on a short time scale. A lot of that cooling episode, though, has also been eliminated from the things that are shown to the public.
Well, let's take a break, and then when we come back, I want to talk about a little bit more. First of all, I want to talk about what you call the perversion of climate science, but I also want to talk about some other aspects, because there are some that say, well, still it would be good to have renewable energy. And that was another really great insight from your book, because right now you have some of the various individuals that are promoting renewable energy, and I'm all about solar panels, I'm all about wind turbines and all the rest, but you have some very arresting diagrams to show how ineffective that will be. After all, the wind doesn't blow 24/7, and certainly you would have to have a lot of windmills out there to even come close to even being able to offset one particular place that is producing energy. So we want to learn a little bit more about some of the physics there as well. So we have a lot more to cover, and it's all part of this book, The Mythology of Global Warming, Climate Change Fiction versus Scientific Facts. Dr. Bruce Bunker with us, and he will continue with us right after these important messages.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Dr. Bruce Bunker with us. If you'd like to join our conversation, we'll take some phone calls. The Mythology of Global Warming, Climate Change Fiction versus Scientific Facts. It is a book that I think would really help you understand some of the science behind this and some of the misinterpretation. About 250 pages. You can get it in paperback or Kindle, and I think it'd be very helpful. We're going to get into the issue of renewable resources, but I thought I'd take just one very interesting anecdote. You have a section here about polar bears, and I think remember some people saying that...
Before we do that, I interrupt just 1 second.
Sure.
And that is, we missed one important point when we talked about CO2 and temperature, and that is that they have these computer models that say, oh, well, the temperature should go up by 1 degree or 3 degrees or 5 degrees for every 100 parts per million that CO2 levels go up in the atmosphere. If you actually make a head-to-head comparison on almost any length scale, time scale, you find that there's absolutely no correlation between CO2 levels and temperatures. And just to give an extreme example, 800 million years ago, when the CO2 concentration was over 7,000 parts per million, which is 150 times higher than it is today, was when the Earth suffered its absolute worst ice age during the cryogenian era, where the entire ocean was frozen to a depth of about half a mile. Anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, that's a good point, but I was going to talk about polar bears because a lot of people say, well, I don't understand the science, but I'm really concerned because climate change is going to kill off all the polar bears. Are the polar bears endangered, or actually are they doing better?
Since 1960, the polar bear population has increased by about a factor of 3. Now, if we were just to look at the population numbers, we would say, oh, global warming is good for polar bears. But, of course, that's not really the reason that the polar bear population has rebounded. It's because they put in hunting bans. So we aren't shooting as many polar bears as we used to. But the polar bears are doing just fine. The walruses are doing just fine. In fact, you can look at just about any organism on the planet that you would care to choose, and you would find that they're not going extinct. In fact, if you look at, you mentioned this earlier in the broadcast, what's better for life on Earth, global warming or global cooling? And you would find that life thrives a lot better when both CO2 and temperatures are higher, which is why they have CO2 as a greenhouse gas, because it makes plants grow, and the entire food chain is based on photosynthesis. So the entire food chain does better when the climate is warmer.
Yeah, crop yields are going up dramatically. Yeah, certainly is.
Yeah.
Most of our callers want to talk about some of the policy issues, so we'll get to that in just a minute. But I thought before that, I think one of the other really helpful chapters in your book, and there are many, was the whole idea of renewable energy. And you point out, for example, use a map of San Francisco Bay Area, but you could use anywhere, how much land would be necessary to provide 1 billion watts. And you show a very, very small circle for nuclear, a little bit larger one for solar, and a huge one for wind. And part of the problem is there are only certain parts of the country where solar power and solar energy would even work. In most cases, it's too expensive. Wind power is intermittent, inefficient, and also pretty expensive. So this hand-waving that we get right now from those proposing the Green New Deal that said we can wean ourselves off of various kinds of fossil fuels and go completely to solar and wind and power, maybe hydroelectric, they never seem to mention nuclear, is just a fantasy, isn't it?
It's an absolute fantasy, and of course they pick on they want to destroy nuclear too because it's in second place in terms of providing our energy. But anyway, let's talk about the amount of land required by solar, wind, and nuclear. If you wanted to replace all of the fossil fuels for our entire energy and generate as much as we have now, if you wanted to do it with solar energy, the amount of land you would need would be 2 million square miles. If you wanted to do it with wind energy, it would be 11 million square miles. Well, you might ask yourself, what's the area of the continental U.S.? It's 3 million square miles.
So there's your point. Yep.
And with nuclear, to generate 1,000 megawatts, you need about half a square mile for nuclear. For wind, it's about 500 square miles. And there's a reason for that. Well, anyway, I won't go into the gory details, but physically, it's impossible. Another dimension is that it's economically impossible.
Right.
And that has to do with the fact that although you will hear claims that, solar and wind don't cost any more than fossil fuels, well, if you look at what the price is to the current customer, you might find areas where that's true. And why is that true? It's because the government is heavily subsidizing both of those industries. And in fact, if you look at the actual cost of those two, it's about 5 times what fossil fuels are. So there's really no contest in terms of having affordable energy. Solar and wind are not affordable.
Let's take some phone calls because some of you want to talk about some of the motives, so we'll get to those. And we'll go first of all to the state of Missouri, KTTK. James, you have the opportunity to share with us. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've heard this thing about global warming for a long time now, since Al Gore came up with it when he was vice president. But I'm a little older than he is. I could remember working in the fields in the late 40s, and when we were called in to eat lunch, come up on the front porch, weekend after weekend, and week out, and the thermometer on our front porch would be about 110 or 112 degrees day in and day out during August and late July. And I'm wondering where that temperature's gone, because it's not been that high in some time.
Well, actually, that's a real good point, and it gets back to this fact that the temperature has actually been oscillating up and down. And the period you're talking about was almost near when the Dust Bowl years were in the 40s, and it turns out the temperatures at that time were essentially the same as they are today, almost identical. After that year, though, there was a period of global cooling, which led to this business about we're going into another global winter, and then it started warming again. But all of that has been written out of the climate narrative. So they don't want you to talk about the Dust Bowl. They don't want you to talk about how hot it was only even during your lifetime.
James, I think you also had some comments about the motives, real quick.
Well, I think it all has to do with money. People are going to make money off of this, and they're promoting this, or they wouldn't be fooling with it if they weren't making some money off of it, because it's not, in my opinion, it's a hoax. And I just think that if I can sell a hoax, I can get rich.
Well, again, that gets into cap and trade and carbon credits and some of those kinds of things. Are some people benefiting from this, or would they benefit from this with some of these kinds of policies?
Oh, you bet they would. But it actually, all of the money motive is a secondary motive, unfortunately. The primary motive has to do with the worldwide socialist movement. And what they want to do is basically figure out a way to wipe out democracies. They want to figure out a way to wipe out your freedom. And the easiest way to do that is to wipe out affordable energy.
Well,
a lot of this is not coming from a few greedy individuals. It's coming from the worldwide socialist movement.
Well, again, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and take a few more phone calls if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Talked a little bit about some of the science, and we'll get into a couple of the other issues there as well. And we've already sort of talked about wind energy. We can talk about electric cars or a variety of other issues that are in this. But most of it really helps you understand that, if anything, the amount of carbon dioxide has dropped rather dramatically. And at times when the carbon dioxide was the lowest, we also had all sorts of other changes taking place. There seems to be really no correlation. And if you look at the average temperature, well, it was a lot warmer back in the medieval warming period. And then we went through kind of a little ice age. And then we just talked about a brief stint right after the Dust Bowl period. So we'll come back and take some more phone calls and give some of you a chance to join the conversation. Again, making available my little booklet, which is kind of a short summary of some of this, called A Biblical View on Climate Change, which talks about some of our responsibilities as Christians to think about this, but also gets into some of the science that simply doesn't get covered every day. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to give you a chance to hear from Dr. Bruce Bunker. So we'll come back. We'll pick up a few more phone calls, and we'll do that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Dr. Bruce Bunker with us. The mythology of global warming, climate change fiction versus scientific facts. Let's head out to New Mexico this time. Mike, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I find your topic fascinating. I've studied energy for 40 years, since the 73 oil embargo. And yes, there are people trying to make a fortune off of this. One of them's Al Gore, because he owns like $20 million worth of carbon credits, which are nothing unless somebody decides to buy them, or unless you are forced to buy them. So there are people trying to make a lot of money off the wind and the solar that's subsidized and mandatory. And also, this is a huge attempt to control the people of the United States because they want to make the energy scarce. They want to make the energy scarce and keep you from having as much as you want, where we should be increasing the amount of energy and lowering the price to all the people. And they want a scarcity so they can control it and be your savior.
Absolutely right on every single one of those points.
Mike,
in
appreciate
fact, Al
that.
Gore is a total hypocrite. He flies around in a jet and has a house that his swimming pool alone eats up as much energy as the normal American's 5 houses. But is he really that concerned about global warming? No.
Well, one of the things I pointed out before is sometimes don't look at what people say, look at what they do. I'll take it out of energy for just a minute. You know, you have some of our liberal friends that say, you know, we're convinced that the university is a rape culture and it's a dangerous place for women. But then I notice they send their daughters off to the university anyway. And if they really believe that, they probably wouldn't act that way. When people tell me that they're convinced that the end of the world is just 12 years away, and then they have long-term investments, when they tell us that we need to cut back our energy consumption and their carbon footprint is larger than mine, you know, you have to kind of ask some of those questions. So those are good. Let me head up to Alaska, North Pole, Alaska, KJNP. Curtis, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, first off, your guest said exactly what I've been thinking for a long time. It's that these guys aren't global warming warriors, they're communists. And there's 2 ways a nation has been run into communism. One is down the barrel of a gun, which is why they need to take all of our guns. And the second is to starve you into it, and that sounds like their better option. And I was also wanting to tell you my story of when I met the lady who was studying cow farts, if that's okay.
Where are we going with this? Are you talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or what?
No. Back in 95, I was driving across the Great Plains, and that's when this cow farts thing first hit the news. And I'm looking around, I'm going, you know, there were billions of buffalo here where I'm seeing nothing now.
And that'd be called methane, right? Let's use the right word there.
Well, they were studying methane, yes.
Yes, okay.
So, you know, there were billions of buffalo out here, and now there's nothing. There are very few cows. Well, okay, maybe they're in a barn. So anyway, I get to Utah. My friends say, we got a friend who works at the university. You want to go out there with her? So, yeah, that'd be cool. So I get in the truck with her. What are you studying? Well, I'm studying methane output on cows.
Thank you.
I said, no fooling.
Yeah.
I'm in the truck with they.
Okay.
So I need to chime in on this topic because it's something we didn't really cover. And that is, what are the real dominant greenhouse gases on Earth? What would you guess? Is it methane, CO2?
Water.
It's not CO2.
It's water. It's water.
Water. Yes,
Water.
That's right.
Water provides 140 times more of the greenhouse effect than CO2. And if you're talking about methane, it's 28,000 times more.
Yeah.
Any discussion of methane is completely and totally ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, Curtis, let me let you finish your story, and then we'll get to another call if I can.
Well, what they were studying is they were studying the methane output of the cattle's breath to determine the efficiency of the feed. Mm-hmm. So I asked her, I said, what's this with global warming? And she just waved at me and said, well, you have to get your federal funding somehow.
Oh, boy. That's what I was afraid of. That's back to the money part, isn't it? You know, by the way, Bruce, there are a number of individuals I know that not only are labeled as climate change skeptics or deniers, you know, like a Holocaust denier, but if you don't kind of follow the money and if you don't promote the idea of climate change, your grants oftentimes dry up, don't they?
Absolutely. The people who control the money in that area are almost all diehard climate change progressives. So you better toe the line or you get nothing. In fact, I had an almost impossible time just getting my book published because it is not politically correct.
Yes. Well, we gave it some visibility.
Publishing houses tried to block it.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the media tries to block it. The university system tries to block it. public schools try to block it. Anyway.
Well, we gave you a national audience today. Let me take at least one more phone call here. We've been talking about Greenland, and I think Rick in Nevada, KNLB, wants to talk about something. So, Rick, you have the floor.
Thank you. I have a question. Why is no one giving consideration to the volcanic magma underneath Greenland that might be responsible for melting all the glaciers? And I recall a while, sometime back, I can't remember when, but there was a volcanic explosion that all the smoke that went up into the sky had to reroute all the airplanes because of that. And I know they have these hot tubs, or hot, not tubs, but hot springs that are around there.
Yes.
Well, it turns out the country that you're really talking about is Iceland. The Vatnajökull volcano erupted, and it caused a huge melt of the glacier on Iceland. And in fact, the amount of water flowing out of that glacier when the volcano was erupted was equal to the flow of the Congo River. so it did big time melting in a short period of time. And you're absolutely right about that. But you mentioned Greenland. It turns out essentially all of the ice on Earth is in Antarctica and Greenland, and neither one of those is going to be melting anytime soon.
That's right. So, well, we're just about out of time, and I just wanted people to know about your book, and I'll try to put it in our next bibliography on our booklet, but if nothing else, 250 pages, which takes you through all sorts of different issues, Bruce, and I know you said you had difficulty getting it published and getting some publicity, but we gave you a national forum here to talk about everything from carbon dioxide to sea levels to renewable energy, even talked about polar bears and some of the political implications. So if nothing else, I really appreciate you giving us an hour today to talk about your book, The Mythology of Global Warming, and also thank you for writing the book and putting some of the facts and figures in there so people can read it and learn about it for themselves. So thank you for joining us today.
And I really appreciate you actually providing your listeners with some facts they probably don't have access to normally, and it takes courage to do that, I think, in the current climate. So,
well, again, one of the reasons we talk about it, we've said before here on Point of View that nothing is off the table. Just before I let you go, again, we just have been making available my little booklet, which, of course, is fairly short, just 12 pages, but it is kind of a good summary on this issue of climate change. And then, of course, if you say, well, I want to see the science for myself, this is the book. The Mythology of Global Warming is one of those resources. And, of course, I mentioned Roy Spencer, his book Climate Confusion came out a number of years ago. So there's a couple of really good books that have been published, but very few. And it's important for you to understand a little bit more about what actually is going on and the science behind it. So that's why we covered it today here on Point of View. Well, we have a lot more to cover tomorrow. Jim Dennison will be with us, Bill Hendricks, and Nicole Mullins. I want to thank Andrew and Steve. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
From Affirm Films, Provident Films, and the Kindred Brothers comes Overcomer. John Harrison is a frustrated coach questioning his value until he crosses paths with a student struggling on her own journey.
What have you allowed to define you? When you find your identity in the one who created you, it'll change your whole perspective.
Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters this Friday. More information is available at overcomermovie.com.
It's been said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. That was definitely true in the 19th century when preacher Charles Spurgeon said it. But here in the 21st century, truth can be just as fast. Think about it. When Point of View presents the truth, it reaches people across America and around the world instantly. You make that instant truth a reality when you join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Get all the details now at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have.
You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View,